Picture this: a quiet honor student minding her own business when 3 football players decide to humiliate her in front of the entire school by yanking down her skirt. What they didn't know was that this shy girl had been secretly training in combat techniques her whole life. What happened next left the bullies flat on their backs and became the most legendary moment in high school history. If you're ready for the most satisfying karma story you'll ever hear, you're in the right place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the brick facade of Riverside High School as Rosa Thompson stepped out of her mother's sedan, her canvas messenger bag slung carefully over her shoulder. At 17, Maya had perfected the art of invisibility. She kept her auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wore modest jeans and oversized sweaters, and had mastered the skill of walking through crowded hallways without drawing attention. In a school where popularity was measured in Instagram followers and weekend party invitations, Maya was content to exist in the shadows, focusing on her studies and her secret after-school activities that nobody knew about. Millbrook, Pennsylvania was the kind of suburban town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Except when it came to Maya. Her classmates saw her as the quiet girl who sat in the front row, always had her homework done, and never caused trouble. What they didn't see was the girl who spent every evening at her grandmother's house, learning techniques that would make a Navy SEAL proud. Rosa Thompson, Maya's 70-year-old grandmother, had been teaching women self-defense since the 1980s, back when it was considered radical for women to learn how to fight back. She'd trained Maya since she was 8 years old, not just in physical techniques, but in the mental discipline required to stay calm under pressure and strike with precision when necessary. The Thompson family had moved to Millbrook 3 years ago when Maya's father got a job managing the local bank, and Maya had worked hard to maintain her low profile. She'd learned early that being different, being skilled, being anything other than ordinary made you a target. So she hid her abilities, kept her head down, and focused on her goal of getting into Penn State with a full academic scholarship. She had straight A's, perfect attendance, and college acceptance letters that would arrive any day now. Everything was going according to plan. As Maya walked through the main entrance of Riverside High, she noticed the usual morning chaos. Students clustered around lockers, sharing weekend gossip and comparing notes for first-period tests. The hallways smelled like industrial cleaner and teenage desperation, a combination that had become oddly comforting over the years. She navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding politely to the few classmates who acknowledged her existence, and made her way toward the science wing where her locker was located. That's when she saw him. Tyler Brooks stood at the center of the hallway like he owned it, which in many ways he did. At 18, Tyler was everything Maya wasn't: loud, popular, and completely comfortable being the center of attention. He was the star quarterback of the Riverside Ravens, the team that had won the state championship 2 years running. His father, District Attorney Richard Brooks, was one of the most powerful men in the county, and Tyler had grown up knowing that his last name opened doors and closed mouths. He was handsome in that all-American way that made parents trust him and teachers give him the benefit of the doubt. But Maya had seen the way he treated people when he thought no one important was watching. Tyler's crew followed him everywhere like a pack of loyal dogs. Jake Martinez, the team's linebacker, was built like a refrigerator and had the personality to match. He did whatever Tyler told him to do without question, partly out of loyalty, and partly because he wasn't smart enough to think for himself. Connor Walsh came from old money, the kind of family that had streets named after them in the historic district. His parents donated enough money to the school to have a wing named after them, which meant Connor could get away with just about anything. Together, the 3 of them formed the unofficial royalty of Riverside High. and they ruled their kingdom with an iron fist wrapped in a Letterman jacket. Maya had managed to avoid their attention for 3 years by being unremarkable, but as she approached her locker, she noticed Tyler's eyes following her. There was something different about his expression today, something calculating and cruel that made her stomach tighten with unease. She'd heard rumors about Tyler's behavior toward girls, whispers in the bathroom about unwanted touches and inappropriate comments, but the girls who complained were usually dismissed as attention seekers or troublemakers. After all, Tyler Brooks was golden boy material, destined for a full ride to a Division I college and probably a career in politics like his father. Who would believe he was capable of anything truly wrong? Maya reached her locker and began spinning the combination, hoping to grab her books and disappear into the safety of her first period classroom. She could feel Tyler's presence before she saw him, that particular energy that predators give off when they've identified their prey. She kept her movements calm and deliberate, remembering her grandmother's teachings about never showing fear or weakness. Predators were drawn to signs of vulnerability like sharks to blood in the water. The hallway was packed with students rushing to beat the first bell, but Maya noticed how quickly a circle of space cleared around Tyler and his friends as they approached. Other students seemed to sense the tension in the air, that electric feeling that comes before a storm. Some kids slowed their pace, sensing drama, while others hurried past, not wanting to be caught in whatever was about to happen. Maya's fingers worked the lock with steady precision, muscle memory taking over as her mind calculated distances and exit routes. Tyler's voice cut through the morning chatter like a knife. Well, look what we have here." His tone was casual, almost friendly, but Maya could hear the underlying menace. She'd learned to read the subtle signs of aggression from her grandmother, who'd taught her that violence was often preceded by seemingly innocent interactions. Maya finished opening her locker and turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral, and her posture relaxed but balanced. "Good morning, Tyler," she said politely, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. She'd learned that acknowledging bullies sometimes diffused situations, but she could see in Tyler's eyes that he wasn't looking for a peaceful resolution. He was looking for entertainment, and she was about to become the main attraction. Jake and Connor positioned themselves on either side of Tyler, creating a wall of muscle and malice that blocked other students' view of what was happening. Maya noticed how strategically they'd chosen this spot, right next to the emergency exit that was always locked from the inside, in a section of hallway that was partially hidden from the main flow of traffic. This wasn't a spontaneous act of bullying, this was planned. Tyler stepped closer, invading Maya's personal space with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "You know, Maya, I've been watching you for a while now. Always so quiet, so mysterious. Makes a guy wonder what you're hiding under all those baggy clothes." His eyes traveled down her body in a way that made her skin crawl, and she saw several other students notice the interaction, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Maya's training kicked in automatically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She assessed the situation with the cool precision her grandmother had drilled into her over countless hours of practice. 3 opponents, all larger and stronger than her, but likely overconfident and untrained. Multiple witnesses which could work for or against her depending on how the situation played out. Limited space to maneuver, but enough room to execute defensive techniques if necessary. Most importantly, she recognized the pattern of escalation that her grandmother had taught her to identify. This wasn't going to end with words. "I'm not hiding anything," Maya replied calmly, taking a small step back to maintain distance while appearing to simply adjust her position. "I'm just trying to get to class." She kept her voice level and reasonable, giving Tyler every opportunity to back down gracefully. Some bullies were just testing boundaries, looking for a reaction, and would move on if they didn't get the response they wanted. But Maya could see in Tyler's eyes that he was past the point of backing down. He'd committed to this course of action, probably in front of his friends, and his reputation depended on following through. Connor snickered, his expensive cologne not quite masking the scent of entitlement and cruelty. "Come on, Tyler. I bet she's got something good under there. These quiet ones always do." His comment drew a few uncomfortable laughs from students, who were close enough to hear. But Maya noticed that most of the observers looked disturbed by the direction the conversation was taking. Tyler's smile was sharp and predatory. "You know what, Connor? I think you're right. Maybe it's time we found out what little Maya Thompson has been keeping to herself." He reached out toward the hem of Maya's sweater, his intentions clear. "What do you say, Maya? Want to show everyone what you're working with?" The hallway seemed to freeze as students realized what was about to happen. Some pulled out their phones, whether to record evidence or entertainment. Maya couldn't tell. Others looked away, unwilling to watch but too afraid to intervene. Maya felt the familiar calm that came over her during her training sessions with her grandmother. That moment of perfect clarity where time seemed to slow down and every option became crystal clear. "Don't touch me," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a note of warning that Tyler was too arrogant to heed. She shifted her weight slightly, preparing for what she knew was coming next. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "The best fight is the one you avoid, but when avoidance isn't possible, end it quickly and decisively." Tyler laughed, a sound full of contempt and privilege. "Or what? You'll tell the principal? Report me to my daddy?" He lunged forward, his hands reaching for the waistband of Maya's jeans, clearly intending to humiliate her in front of the entire school. It was the kind of assault that destroyed reputations and traumatized victims, the kind of violation that Tyler probably thought was just harmless fun. But Tyler Brooks had made a critical error in judgment. He'd assumed that Maya Thompson was just another victim, another quiet girl who would freeze up and submit to his will. He'd never encountered someone who'd spent nearly a decade training for exactly this moment. Someone who'd been taught that the best response to aggression was swift, precise, and overwhelming force. Maya's response was instantaneous and devastating. As Tyler's hands moved toward her clothing, she grabbed his right wrist with both hands, using his own momentum against him. She pivoted on her left foot, applying pressure to his wrist joint while simultaneously sweeping his legs out from under him with a technique her grandmother called the Great Equalizer. Tyler went down hard, his back hitting the linoleum floor, with a sound that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Before Jake and Connor could react, Maya was already moving. She spun toward Jake, using the momentum from her previous technique to drive her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. Jake doubled over, gasping for air, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. Connor started to move forward, but Maya's heel caught him in the shin with enough force to make him stumble backward, his expensive shoes providing no traction on the smooth floor. The entire sequence took less than 5 seconds. Tyler lay on the floor, clutching his wrist and staring up at Maya with a mixture of shock, pain, and disbelief. Jake was still trying to remember how to breathe, and Connor was limping backward, his face pale with shock. Maya stood over them, her posture calm and controlled, not even breathing hard despite having just dismantled 3 opponents, who outweighed her by a combined total of over 200 pounds. The hallway erupted in chaos. Students who had been watching in stunned silence suddenly found their voices, some cheering, others gasping, many fumbling with their phones to capture the aftermath of what would quickly become the most talked about incident in Riverside High history. Maya looked around at the crowd, her heart racing but her expression composed, and realized that her life had just changed forever. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of attention, and now she was standing in the center of a circle of her peers, having just demonstrated abilities that would make her the subject of every conversation. every text message, and every social media post for weeks to come. But as she looked down at Tyler, still sprawled on the floor with his Letterman jacket twisted around his shoulders and his carefully styled hair messed up, she felt something she hadn't expected: satisfaction. Tyler Brooks had built his reputation on intimidating people who couldn't fight back, on using his size and status to make others feel small and powerless. But for the first time in his life, he'd encountered someone who wasn't afraid of him, someone who had the skills and the will to stand up to his bullying. As he struggled to get back on his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage, Maya could see that this was far from over. The first bell rang, its shrill sound cutting through the noise of excited students and confused voices. Maya calmly closed her locker, gathered her books, and walked toward her first period classroom, leaving Tyler and his friends to deal with the consequences of their actions. As she moved through the parting crowd, she could hear the whispers starting, the speculation about who Maya Thompson really was and where she'd learned to fight like that. But Maya wasn't thinking about the gossip or the attention that was sure to follow. She was thinking about her grandmother's words, spoken during countless training sessions. The moment you use these skills, everything changes. People will see you differently, treat you differently, expect different things from you. Make sure you're ready for that responsibility. As Maya took her seat in AP Biology, she realized that she was about to find out just how ready she really was. Maya slipped into her AP Biology classroom just as the second bell rang, sliding into her usual seat in the second row without making eye contact with anyone. Mrs. Patterson was already writing equations on the whiteboard, her back turned to the class as students filed in with the usual Monday morning sluggishness. But Maya could feel the energy in the room was different today. There were whispers, stolen glances, and the kind of electric tension that follows a major incident. Sarah Mitchell, who sat behind Maya, leaned forward and whispered, "Holy crap, Maya. Is it true what they're saying about the hallway?" Maya kept her eyes fixed on her notebook, pretending to organize her materials while her mind raced. She'd hoped that maybe the incident would be forgotten by first period, that people would move on to other gossip, but she could already tell that wasn't going to happen. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya replied quietly, but Sarah wasn't buying it. Neither was Derek Patterson, Mrs. Patterson's son, who sat 2 seats over and was staring at Maya like she'd grown a second head. The whispers continued throughout the class, despite Mrs. Patterson's attempts to maintain order, and Maya realized that by lunchtime, everyone in school would know her name. The morning passed in a blur of stolen glances and hushed conversations. In second period English, Maya overheard 2 freshman girls talking about how that quiet senior totally destroyed Tyler Brooks and his crew. By third period chemistry, the story had evolved into Maya being some kind of secret martial arts expert who'd been hiding her abilities for years. The truth was close enough to make Maya uncomfortable, but the mythology growing around her was taking on a life of its own. It was during fourth period study hall that Maya first encountered the aftermath of her actions in a more direct way. She was sitting in the library, trying to focus on her calculus homework, when Emma Chun approached her table. Emma was one of those students who existed in the same social sphere as Maya, smart but not popular, friendly but not part of any particular clique. She was also Tyler Brooks' lab partner in physics, which gave her access to information that Maya needed to. "Here, can I sit?" Emma asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from Maya. When Maya nodded, Emma sat down and leaned forward, speaking in the kind of whisper that library conversations required. "Tyler's been telling people that you attacked him for no reason. He's saying you have anger management issues and that his father is going to press charges for assault." Maya's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd expected Tyler to try to spin the story, but hearing it confirmed made the threat feel more real. "What exactly is he saying happened?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Emma glanced around to make sure no one was listening before continuing. He's telling people that you just went crazy and started hitting him and his friends. He's got Jake and Connor backing up his story, saying you attacked them when they were just trying to talk to you. But Maya, I saw what really happened. I was coming out of the bathroom when it started, and I saw Tyler reach for your clothes. That's not talking, that's assault. The relief Maya felt at having a witness was overwhelming, but she tried not to show it. Are you willing to tell people what you actually saw? She asked, knowing that asking Emma to go against Tyler Brooks was asking her to risk her own safety and reputation. Emma nodded firmly. I already told my friends, and I'll tell anyone else who asks. What Tyler did was wrong, and what you did was self-defense. But Maya, you need to know that his father is District Attorney Richard Brooks. Tyler's been getting away with stuff for years because of who his dad is. This isn't going to be a fair fight. Maya had been hoping that the incident would blow over, that Tyler would be too embarrassed to make a big deal out of being taken down by someone half his size. But Emma's warning made it clear that Tyler wasn't going to let this go quietly. His reputation had taken a hit, and he was going to do whatever it took to restore it, even if that meant destroying Maya's life in the process. Thanks for telling me, Maya said, genuinely grateful to have at least one person who'd witnessed the truth. I appreciate you being willing to speak up. Emma smiled, and Maya realized that she might have gained her first real friend at Riverside. Hi, just when she needed one most. Tyler Brooks has been bullying people for years, and everyone's been too scared to stand up to him. What you did this morning was amazing, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. As Emma walked away, Maya tried to process what she'd just learned. Tyler wasn't just going to spread rumors and try to damage her reputation. He was planning to use his father's position to bring legal charges against her. The district attorney's office had the power to turn Maya's act of self-defense into a criminal case. And Maya knew that in a small town like Millbrook, the Brooks family's influence extended into every corner of the justice system. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Heard there was some kind of incident at school. Everything okay? Word was already spreading beyond the school, which meant Maya's parents would know the full story soon enough. She texted back a quick, I'm fine, we'll explain later, and tried to focus on her homework. But her mind kept wandering to the potential consequences of what she'd done. The lunch bell rang, and Maya made her way to the cafeteria with a sense of dread. The cafeteria was the social epicenter of any high school, the place where reputations were made and destroyed, where rumors spread faster than wildfire. As she entered the large, noisy room, Maya immediately noticed that conversations stopped and heads turned in her direction. She'd gone from invisible to infamous in the span of one morning. Maya grabbed a tray and moved to the lunch line, trying to act normal while feeling like every pair of eyes in the room was focused on her. She could hear fragments of conversations as she passed different tables. Heard she knows karate. Tyler's dad is furious. Can't believe quiet Maya did that. The attention was overwhelming, and Maya longed for the anonymity she'd worked so hard to maintain. She found an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria, hoping to eat her lunch in relative peace. But within minutes she was joined by Emma and two other students she recognized but had never really talked to. Sam Rodriguez was a junior who spent most of his time in the computer lab, and Lisa Park was a senior in Maya's AP English class who had always seemed friendly but distant. Mind if we sit? Sam asked, but he was already pulling out a chair. I wanted to tell you that what you did this morning was epic. Tyler Brooks has had it coming for a long time. Lisa nodded in agreement. My little sister is a sophomore, and Tyler's been bothering her and her friends all year, making gross comments, touching them when they don't want to be touched. She's been afraid to report it because everyone knows his dad will just make the complaint disappear. Maya listened as her new table mates shared their own stories and experiences with Tyler's behavior. It became clear that Tyler's actions that morning weren't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of predatory behavior that had been going on for years. The difference was that Maya was the first person who'd been able to fight back effectively, and her response had been captured on multiple cell phone cameras. "The videos are already all over social media," Sam told her, pulling out his phone to show her. "Someone posted it on TikTok and it's got like 50,000 views already. The comments are incredible. Everyone's calling you a hero." Maya watched the video with a mixture of pride and horror. The footage was clear enough to show exactly what had happened. Tyler reaching for her clothes, Maya's precise defensive response, and the three boys ending up on the floor in a matter of seconds. The video evidence was undeniable proof that Maya had acted in self-defense, but she also knew that viral videos had a way of taking on their own life. "This is going to make things worse," Maya said, handing the phone back to Sam. "Tyler's already planning to have his father press charges. A viral video is just going to make him more determined to destroy me." Emma leaned forward, her expression serious. "Maya, you need to understand something. Half the school is terrified of Tyler Brooks, and the other half worships him. What you did this morning changed the power dynamic of this entire place. People are going to expect you to be some kind of defender of justice now." Before Maya could respond, a commotion near the cafeteria entrance caught everyone's attention. Tyler Brooks had entered the cafeteria, flanked by Jake and Connor, both of whom were still moving gingerly from their encounter with Maya that morning. Tyler himself had a bandage on his wrist and a look of barely controlled rage on his face. The entire cafeteria fell silent as he scanned the room, clearly looking for Maya. When his eyes found her table, Tyler started walking in their direction, his jaw set and his shoulders tense. Other students quickly moved out of his way, creating a clear path between Tyler and Maya's corner table. The tension in the room was palpable, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Maya stood up slowly, her training automatically taking over as she assessed the situation. The cafeteria was crowded, with limited space to maneuver, but there were multiple exits and plenty of witnesses. Tyler looked angry enough to do something stupid, but Maya doubted he'd risk another physical confrontation in such a public setting. Tyler stopped about 10 feet from Maya's table, close enough to be heard but far enough away to avoid looking like he was starting another fight. His voice carried across the silent cafeteria as he spoke, making sure everyone could hear him clearly. "You think you're pretty tough, don't you, Thompson?" Tyler's tone was full of contempt and barely controlled rage. "Attacking people from behind, fighting dirty. That's not fighting, that's assault." Maya remained standing, her posture calm but alert. She could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes watching this confrontation, and she knew that how she handled this moment would define her reputation for the rest of her time at Riverside High. "I defended myself when you tried to assault me," Maya replied, her voice carrying clearly across the silent cafeteria. Everyone here saw what really happened. Tyler's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Being contradicted publicly, especially by someone he'd tried to victimize, was clearly more than his ego could handle. "You're lying, and everyone knows it. But don't worry, Thompson. My father's going to make sure you pay for what you did. We don't let criminals run around loose in this town." The threat was clear, and Maya felt a chill run down her spine. But before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Students throughout the cafeteria began to stand up one by one, until nearly half the room was on their feet. They weren't saying anything, but their message was clear. They were standing with Maya. Tyler looked around the room, his confidence faltering as he realized that public opinion wasn't running in his favor. The viral video had already shaped the narrative, and most students had seen enough of Tyler's behavior over the years to know who the real aggressor was. His attempt to intimidate Maya publicly was backfiring spectacularly. "This isn't over," Tyler said, his voice losing some of its earlier authority. He turned and walked out of the cafeteria, followed by Jake and Connor, leaving behind a room full of students who were still standing in silent support of Maya. As the cafeteria slowly returned to normal, Maya sat back down, overwhelmed by what had just happened. She'd never been popular, never been part of any group or movement, but in the span of a few hours, she'd somehow become a symbol of resistance against the school's biggest bully. That was incredible, Lisa said, her eyes shining with excitement. I've never seen Tyler back down from anything before. Sam was already checking his phone again. The video of what just happened is already being shared. Maya, you're not just viral locally anymore. This is going statewide. Maya felt a mixture of pride and terror as she realized how quickly her life was changing. She'd wanted to stay invisible, to graduate quietly and move on to college without any drama. Instead, she'd become the center of a controversy that was growing bigger by the hour. Emma reached across the table and squeezed Maya's hand. I know. This isn't what you wanted, but maybe it's what the school needed. Tyler's been getting away with hurting people for too long. Someone had to stand up to him eventually. As Maya walked to her afternoon classes, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads. She could try to minimize the situation, apologize, and hope that everything would blow over. Or she could embrace the role that circumstances had thrust upon her and use her newfound platform to make real changes at Riverside High. The decision was made for her during 7th period, when she was called to the principal's office over the intercom. The entire classroom fell silent as Maya gathered her things, and she could feel every eye following her as she walked to the door. Principal Anderson's voice over the speaker had sounded serious, and Maya knew that the real consequences of her actions were about to begin. The walk to the principal's office felt longer than usual, and Maya used the time to mentally prepare herself for what was coming. She'd never been in serious trouble before, never even had a detention, but she knew that her situation was complicated by Tyler's father's position in the community. District Attorney Richard Brooks had the power to turn a school disciplinary matter into a criminal case, and Maya suspected that's exactly what was about to happen. The outer office was empty except for Mrs. Henderson, the principal's secretary, who gave Maya a sympathetic look as she announced her arrival. Principal Anderson is waiting for you, she said softly, and Maya could hear the concern in her voice. Maya knocked on the office door and entered when she heard Principal Anderson's voice telling her to come in. The scene that greeted her was exactly what she'd expected and dreaded. Principal Anderson sat behind his desk, looking uncomfortable and stressed, while District Attorney Richard Brooks occupied one of the chairs facing the desk. Brooks was a large man in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention and respect. He looked like an older, more polished version of his son, but with eyes that held intelligence and cunning that Tyler lacked. Miss Thompson, please have a seat, Principal Anderson said, gesturing to the empty chair next to District Attorney Brooks. Maya sat down, keeping her posture straight and her expression neutral, drawing on the mental discipline her grandmother had taught her. District Attorney Brooks turned to look at Maya, his expression unreadable. Miss Thompson, I'm here because my son was assaulted at school this morning, and I want to understand exactly what happened. Maya met his gaze steadily. Your son tried to pull down my clothes in front of a hallway full of students. I defended myself. Brooks' expression didn't change, but Maya caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, at her directness. That's a serious accusation, Miss Thompson. Do you have any proof to support this claim? There were dozens of witnesses, and multiple students recorded the incident on their phones, Maya replied calmly. The evidence is pretty clear about what happened. Principal Anderson cleared his throat nervously. We've reviewed the video footage, and while it does show physical contact, it's difficult to determine who initiated the conflict. Maya turned to look at Principal Anderson, unable to hide her disbelief. It's difficult to determine. The video clearly shows your son reaching for my clothes. How is that difficult to interpret? District Attorney Brooks leaned forward slightly. What the video shows is my son having a conversation with you, followed by you violently attacking him and 2 other students. 3 young men are now injured because of your actions. Maya felt her temper rising but forced herself to remain calm. The video shows your son attempting to sexually assault me and me defending myself. If Jake Martinez and Connor Walsh got hurt, it's because they were helping him attack me. The room fell silent for a moment, and Maya could see Principal Anderson shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He clearly didn't want to be caught between a student's rights and the district attorney's influence, but he also couldn't ignore what the evidence clearly showed. Miss Thompson, District Attorney Brooks said, his tone becoming more formal, I'm prepared to file assault charges against you for the injuries you caused to 3 students. However, I'm willing to consider alternative arrangements if you're willing to cooperate. Maya's blood ran cold. She was being offered a deal, which meant Brooks knew his son was in the wrong but was willing to use his power to protect Tyler anyway. What kind of alternative arrangements? A formal apology to my son and his friends, a commitment to stay away from them for the remainder of the school year, and perhaps some community service to make amends for your violent behavior. Maya stared at District Attorney Brooks, unable to believe what she was hearing. He was asking her to apologize to her attackers and accept punishment for defending herself. The injustice of it was staggering, but Maya also understood the position she was in. Fighting the district attorney's office would be expensive, time-consuming, and potentially devastating to her future college plans. I need time to think about it, Maya said finally, not trusting herself to say more without losing her composure. Brooks nodded. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. But Miss Thompson, I want to be very clear about something. My son has a bright future ahead of him, and I won't let anyone jeopardize that future. I hope you'll make the right choice. The threat was unmistakable, and Maya felt a surge of anger that she struggled to control. Tyler Brooks could sexually assault someone in front of witnesses, but his bright future was more important than justice for his victim. The system was rigged, and Maya was being asked to accept that reality. As Maya left the principal's office, her mind was racing with thoughts and emotions. She had less than 24 hours to decide whether to accept an unjust punishment or fight a legal battle she probably couldn't win. Either choice would have consequences that would follow her for years to come. But as Maya walked through the hallways of Riverside High, she noticed something that gave her hope. Students were looking at her differently now, not with the mixture of pity and dismissal she'd grown accustomed to, but with respect and admiration. She'd become a symbol of resistance, proof that Tyler Brooks wasn't untouchable after all. Maya realized that her decision wouldn't just affect her own future. It would send a message to every other student who'd been victimized by Tyler Brooks, and to every other bully who thought their connections would protect them from consequences. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but Maya also found it empowering. For the first time in her life, Maya Thompson had the power to make a real difference, and she was beginning to understand that some fights were worth having, regardless of the personal cost. The final bell rang, and Maya gathered her things, knowing that the most important decision of her life was waiting for her at home. As she walked toward the exit, Emma Chun fell into step beside her. Whatever you decide, Emma said quietly, you've got people who will support you. Tyler Brooks has ruled this school through fear and intimidation for too long. What you did today gave a lot of people hope that things can change. Maya nodded, grateful for Emma's support, but still feeling the weight of the decision ahead of her. As she stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine, Maya knew that by tomorrow morning, everything would be different. The only question was whether she'd have the courage to fight for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against her. Maya sat in her mother's car outside Riverside High, staring at the brick building that had become the center of a storm she never wanted to create. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and she could see students beginning to arrive for another day of classes. But for Maya, this wasn't just another day. This was the day she had to give District Attorney Brooks her answer. And the weight of that decision had kept her awake most of the night. The ride home yesterday had been quiet, with her mother sensing that something major had happened, but not pushing for details. Maya had spent the evening in her room, supposedly doing homework, but actually replaying the events of the day over and over in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see Tyler's hands reaching for her clothes, could feel the moment when her training took over and she fought back. She'd done the right thing. She knew that with absolute certainty. But doing the right thing didn't always lead to fair consequences. Her phone had been buzzing all evening with messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Word of the incident had spread beyond Riverside High, and students from other schools in the district were reaching out to share their own stories about Tyler Brooks. Apparently, his behavior wasn't limited to his own school. There were stories about parties where he'd gotten aggressive with girls, about incidents at summer camps and youth sports leagues, about a pattern of entitled behavior that went back years. Maya's mother finally knocked on her bedroom door around 9 o'clock, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the expression that meant it was time for a serious conversation. Rosa Thompson was a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, and she'd developed the ability to read people quickly and accurately. She took one look at Maya's face and knew that whatever had happened at school was more serious than a typical teenage drama. "Your father's working late at the bank, so it's just us," her mother said, settling into the chair at Maya's desk. "Want to tell me what really happened today?" Maya had always been close to her mother, but she'd never talked about the bullying she'd witnessed at school or the way Tyler Brooks treated other students. She'd learned to handle problems on her own, partly because she didn't want to worry her parents and partly because she'd never been directly targeted before. But sitting in her bedroom, facing the biggest decision of her young life, Maya realized she needed her mother's guidance. She told her mother everything, starting with Tyler's reputation at school and ending with District Attorney Brooks' ultimatum. Rosa Thompson listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious as Maya described the morning's events and their aftermath. When Maya finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd heard. "Show me the video," her mother said finally, and Maya pulled up the footage on her phone. They watched it together, Sandra's expression hardening as she saw Tyler's actions and Maya's response. When the video ended, Sandra sat back in her chair, her jaw set in a way that Maya recognized as barely controlled anger. "That boy tried to sexually assault you in front of half the school," her mother said, her voice tight with emotion. "And his father wants you to apologize for defending yourself." Maya nodded, feeling some of the weight lift from her shoulders. Now that she'd shared the burden. "He says he'll file assault charges if I don't accept his deal. Mom, I don't know what to do. If I fight this, it could affect my college applications, my scholarship chances, everything I've worked for." Rosa Thompson stood up and began pacing Maya's small bedroom, her nursing training warring with her protective instincts as a mother. "Maya, I want you to listen to me carefully. What you did today was exactly what your grandmother and I have been training you to do your entire life. You protected yourself when someone tried to hurt you, and you should never apologize for that. But Mom, he's the district attorney. He has power, connections, money. How can we fight someone like that?" Sandra stopped pacing and looked directly at her daughter. "By telling the truth and refusing to back down. Maya, if you accept his deal, you're not just betraying yourself. You're betraying every other girl Tyler Brooks has hurt or will hurt in the future. Sometimes doing the right thing costs us something, but that doesn't make it less right." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes, partly from stress and partly From gratitude for having a mother who understood the stakes. What if we lose? What if he destroys our family? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, Sandra said firmly. But Maya, I've seen what happens when good people stay quiet about bad behavior. I've treated too many victims in the emergency room. Girls who were too afraid to speak up or who were silenced by people with power. You have a chance to break that cycle. They talked until nearly midnight, weighing the risks and benefits of each choice. Sandra shared stories from her work at the hospital, cases where she'd seen the long-term effects of assault and abuse. She also talked about the legal system, about how cases like Maya's were often handled, and about the importance of having good legal representation. We'll call your Aunt Jennifer first thing in the morning, Sandra said as she prepared to leave Maya's room. Jennifer was Sandra's younger sister, a civil rights attorney who worked in Philadelphia. She'll know what our options are and how to protect you. Maya slept better that night than she'd expected, comforted by her mother's support and the knowledge that she wouldn't have to face this battle alone. When she woke up Tuesday morning, she felt a sense of calm determination that reminded her of the feeling she got before a particularly challenging training session with her grandmother. The phone call to Aunt Jennifer happened over breakfast, with Maya's father joining the conversation via speakerphone from his office at the bank. David Thompson had been briefed by his wife about the previous day's events, and his reaction had been similar to Sandra's, protective anger mixed with pride in his daughter's strength. Jennifer Thompson Martinez listened to Maya's story with the focused attention of someone who'd handled similar cases before. When Maya finished, Jennifer was quiet for a moment before speaking in the calm, measured tone that had made her successful in courtrooms across Pennsylvania. Maya, what you're describing is a clear case of attempted sexual assault, followed by self-defense. The video evidence supports your version of events, and it sounds like there are multiple witnesses who can corroborate your story. From a legal standpoint, you have a strong case. But what about District Attorney Brooks? Maya asked. He's threatening to file assault charges if I don't apologize and accept punishment. Jennifer's laugh was sharp and humorless. Let him try. Filing false charges against a sexual assault victim who defended herself would be career suicide for any prosecutor, even one with political connections. He's bluffing, Maya, and he's counting on you being too scared to call him on it. Maya felt a surge of hope, but Jennifer's next words brought her back to reality. That said, this won't be easy. Brooks has resources and influence that we'll have to overcome. He'll try to discredit you, to make you look like the aggressor. Are you prepared for that kind of scrutiny? Maya thought about all the students who had stood up in the cafeteria, about Emma's willingness to speak as a witness, about the messages of support that had been flooding her phone. I think so. And I think I have more support than Mr. Brooks realizes. Good, Jennifer said. Because the best way to beat a bully is to refuse to be bullied. Maya, I'm going to drive out to Millbrook this afternoon, and we're going to prepare a response that will make District Attorney Brooks think twice about threatening you again. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Maya's parents decided she should stay home from school while they prepared their legal response, which meant Maya missed the drama that was unfolding at Riverside High in her absence. She learned about it through a steady stream of texts from Emma, Sam, and other students who had become her allies. Apparently, Tyler Brooks had spent the morning telling anyone who would listen that Maya was a dangerous psychopath who belonged in juvenile detention. He'd been showing off his bandaged wrist like a war wound and claiming that Maya had attacked him without provocation. But his story was falling apart under scrutiny, especially as more students came forward with their own experiences of Tyler's behavior. Emma texted that 3 different girls had approached her that morning to share stories about Tyler's inappropriate behavior. One was a junior named Ashley who said Tyler had cornered her at a house party and only backed off when her boyfriend showed up. Another was a sophomore named Kayla who described Tyler following her to her car after school and making lewd comments about what he wanted to do to her. The third was a senior named Rebecca, who said Tyler had grabbed her inappropriately during a school dance and then laughed when she complained. More importantly, San Rodriguez had been busy using his computer skills to preserve evidence. He'd downloaded copies of all the videos from social media platforms and had been documenting the online conversation about the incident. The overwhelming majority of comments supported Maya and criticized Tyler's behavior, with many people sharing their own stories about encounters with the Brooks family's entitled attitude. Maya's phone rang around noon, and she was surprised to see that the caller was Mrs. Patterson, her biology teacher. Maya answered hesitantly, unsure what to expect from a teacher in the middle of this controversy. "Maya, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling you at home," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice warm with concern. "I wanted you to know that I've been teaching at Riverside High for 15 years, and I've watched Tyler Brooks grow up. What you did yesterday was brave, and you have my full support." Maya was touched by her teacher's call, but Mrs. Patterson wasn't finished. "I also wanted you to know that several of us on the faculty have been discussing Tyler's behavior for years. We've all seen incidents, but individually, none of us felt we had enough evidence to take action. Your situation has given us the courage to speak up as well." This was a development Maya hadn't expected. She'd assumed that the teachers either didn't know about Tyler's behavior or were too intimidated by his father's position to do anything about it. Learning that there were adults who were willing to support her made the battle ahead seem less daunting. Jennifer arrived at the Thompson house at 2 o'clock, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of tailored suit that conveyed both professionalism and determination. Maya had only seen her aunt a few times over the years, usually at family gatherings, but she'd always been impressed by Jennifer's intelligence and confidence. Now sitting across from her at the dining room table, Maya felt like she was in the presence of someone who could actually take on District Attorney Brooks and win. Jennifer had spent the drive from Philadelphia making phone calls and doing research. She'd contacted colleagues who specialized in civil rights cases, had reviewed Pennsylvania's laws regarding sexual assault and self-defense, and had even reached out to a private investigator who could help build a case against Tyler Brooks if necessary. "Maya, I want to be completely honest with you about what we're facing," Jennifer said, spreading papers across the table. "District Attorney Brooks is a powerful man with a lot to lose. His son's behavior reflects on him, and if this case goes public, it could damage his political career. That makes him dangerous, but it also gives us leverage." Jennifer explained the legal strategy she'd developed. Rather than waiting for Brooks to file charges, they would take the offensive by filing a complaint with the Pennsylvania State Police about Brooks' attempt to intimidate a sexual assault victim. They would also file a civil lawsuit against Tyler Brooks for assault and battery, and they would request a formal investigation into whether District Attorney Brooks had abused his office by threatening criminal charges to protect his son. "The key is to make this bigger than just a high school incident," Jennifer said. "We need to frame this as a civil rights issue, a case about powerful people trying to silence their victims. The media attention will put pressure on Brooks to handle this appropriately." Maya felt overwhelmed by the scope of what her aunt was proposing, but she also felt a sense of excitement. For the first time since the incident, she felt like she had a real chance to not just defend herself, but to create lasting change. Jennifer's phone rang, and she glanced at the caller ID before answering. "This is Jennifer Thompson Martinez." She listened for a moment, her expression growing serious. "I understand. Yes, we'll be there." When she hung up, Jennifer looked at Maya and her parents with an expression that was part concern, part anticipation. That was Principal Anderson. Apparently, District Attorney Brooks is at the school right now, demanding to speak with Maya. He's threatening to have her arrested if she doesn't come in to accept his deal. Maya's father stood up, his face flushed with anger. "He can't do that, can he?" Maya's just a kid. No, he can't, Jennifer said firmly. And the fact that he's trying shows how desperate he's getting. Maya, are you ready to face this head-on? Maya thought about all the people who were counting on her, all the victims who had been silenced by powerful men like District Attorney Brooks. She thought about her grandmother's training, about the strength and discipline that had been instilled in her from childhood. Most of all, she thought about the girl she wanted to be, the woman she was becoming. Yes, Maya said, standing up and looking her aunt directly in the eye. I'm ready. The drive to Riverside High felt different this time. Instead of the anxiety and uncertainty Maya had felt that morning, she now felt a sense of purpose and determination. She wasn't going to school as a scared teenager hoping to avoid trouble. She was going as someone who had made the decision to fight for what was right, regardless of the consequences. Jennifer had made several phone calls during the drive, and by the time they arrived at the school, there were 2 news vans in the parking lot and a small crowd of people gathered near the main entrance. Word had gotten out about the confrontation, and the media was beginning to pay attention to the story. Remember, Jennifer said as they walked toward the school, you don't have to say anything to anyone except what we've discussed. District Attorney Brooks is going to try to intimidate you, but he has no real power over you. You've done nothing wrong. Maya nodded, drawing on her training to stay calm and focused. As they entered the school, she could see students lining the hallways, all of them watching to see what would happen next. The support she felt from her classmates gave her strength, reminding her that this fight was about more than just her own future. Principal Anderson met them at the main office, looking harried and uncomfortable. Maya, thank you for coming. District Attorney Brooks is waiting in my office and he's very upset about the media attention this is getting. Jennifer stepped forward, extending her hand to Principal Anderson. I'm Jennifer Thompson Martinez, Maya's attorney. Before we proceed, I want to make it clear that my client is here voluntarily and is under no obligation to accept any deals or agreements that weren't negotiated through proper legal channels. Principal Anderson shook Jennifer's hand, looking relieved to have an adult advocate in the situation. Of course, I should mention that we've also received several calls from parents and faculty members who want to share information about this incident and related matters. Maya felt a surge of hope. It sounded like the support she'd sensed was translating into real action from the adult community. As they walked toward Principal Anderson's office, Maya caught sight of Emma and Sam standing near the main hallway, both of them giving her encouraging smiles. District Attorney Brooks was waiting in the office, and Maya could see immediately that he was not happy about how the situation was developing. His face was red, his jaw was clenched, and he was pacing back and forth in the small space like a caged animal. When Maya and Jennifer entered, he turned to face them with barely controlled anger. Miss Thompson, I thought we had an understanding, Brooks said, his voice tight with frustration. Instead, I find out that you've hired an attorney and gone to the media. This is not how we handle things in Millbrook. Jennifer stepped slightly in front of Maya, her posture professional but protective. Mr. Brooks, I'm Jennifer Thompson Martinez, and I represent Maya Thompson. My client has done nothing wrong, and she will not be accepting any deals that require her to apologize for defending herself from sexual assault. Brooks' face grew even redder. Sexual assault? That's a serious accusation, counselor. I hope you have evidence to back up such a claim. We have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and a pattern of similar behavior by your son, Jennifer replied calmly. What we don't have is any evidence that Maya committed a crime. In fact, Pennsylvania law is very clear about the right to use reasonable force in self-defense. The room fell silent as Brooks processed what Jennifer had said. Maya could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that was clearly spiraling away from him. When he spoke again, his tone was more measured, but no less threatening. "Counselor, I think you're underestimating the seriousness of this situation. 3 students were injured, and there needs to be accountability. If Miss Thompson won't accept responsibility voluntarily, then I'll have no choice but to pursue criminal charges." Jennifer smiled, and Maya recognized the expression as the same one her aunt wore when she was about to deliver a devastating argument in court. "Mr. Brooks, I think you're the one who's underestimating the situation. Filing false charges against a sexual assault victim would be a violation of your oath of office and could result in criminal charges against you. Is that really the path you want to take?" Brooks stared at Jennifer for a long moment, and Maya could see him struggling with the realization that his usual tactics weren't going to work. He was used to intimidating people who didn't have resources or representation, but Jennifer was clearly not going to be bullied. "This conversation is over," Brooks said finally, grabbing his coat from the back of his chair. "But this matter is far from resolved." As he walked toward the door, Jennifer called after him, "Mr. Brooks, you should know that we'll be filing a formal complaint about your conduct in this matter. Threatening to abuse your office to protect your son from the consequences of his actions is exactly the kind of corruption that the people of Pennsylvania won't tolerate." Brooks stopped at the door and turned back, his face now pale with what Maya realized was fear. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, District Attorney Brooks looked like a man who was beginning to understand that he might have overplayed his hand. "You have no idea what you're getting into," he said quietly, but the threat lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "Actually, I do," Jennifer replied. "I know exactly what we're getting into, and I know exactly how it's going to end. Your son will face consequences for his actions, and you'll face consequences for trying to obstruct justice. The only question is whether you want to make this easy or hard on yourself." After Brooks left, the office felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had passed. Principal Anderson looked visibly relieved, and Maya realized that he'd been as intimidated by District Attorney Brooks as everyone else in town. "Maya," Principal Anderson said, "I owe you an apology. I should have handled yesterday's incident differently, and I should have protected you from that kind of intimidation. It won't happen again." Maya nodded, accepting the apology graciously. She understood that Principal Anderson was in a difficult position, caught between doing what was right and dealing with political pressure from powerful families. As they prepared to leave the school, Jennifer's phone rang again. This time, when she answered, her expression shifted from serious to surprised to pleased. "That was a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer," Jennifer told Maya as they walked toward the parking lot. "Apparently, your story is getting attention at the state level. There's going to be an investigation into District Attorney Brooks' conduct, and several other families are coming forward with complaints about his son's behavior." Maya felt a mixture of satisfaction and nervousness. She'd wanted justice, but she hadn't expected her personal situation to become a statewide news story. As they reached Jennifer's car, Maya saw that the crowd outside the school had grown larger, with more news vans and what looked like some of Tyler's supporters holding signs. "Maya," Jennifer said, unlocking the car, "I want you to understand something. This fight is just beginning, and it's going to get harder before it gets easier. Are you sure you want to continue?" Maya looked back at Riverside High, at all the students who were watching from the windows, at the reporters who were documenting everything, at the community that was finally paying attention to problems that had been ignored for too long. "Yes," Maya said, getting into the car. "I'm sure." As they drove away from the school, Maya realized that she was no longer just defending herself. She had become the catalyst for a reckoning that was long overdue, and she was ready to see it through to the end. 3 weeks had passed since Maya's confrontation with District Attorney Brooks, and Riverside High School felt like a completely different place. The hallways that had once been dominated by Tyler Brooks and his crew now buzzed with a new energy. One where students walked with their heads held higher and their voices carried more confidence. Maya had become something she never intended to be, a symbol of change, a catalyst for justice, and proof that even the most powerful bullies could be held accountable. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't come without cost. Maya's story had indeed made statewide news, with reporters from Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and even national outlets picking up the narrative of a small-town girl who fought back against privilege and corruption. The attention had been overwhelming at times, with interview requests, social media followers, and constant scrutiny of every aspect of Maya's life. But through it all, she'd maintained her focus on the bigger picture, ensuring that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. The investigation into District Attorney Brooks' conduct had moved swiftly once other victims began coming forward. It turned out that Tyler's behavior was part of a pattern that stretched back years, and his father's protection of him had created a culture of impunity that extended beyond just high school incidents. 3 families had filed formal complaints about Tyler's behavior at youth sports events, summer camps, and community gatherings, all describing similar patterns of sexual harassment and assault that had been covered up or dismissed. More damaging to District Attorney Brooks personally were the revelations about his use of office resources to intimidate Tyler's victims and their families. Internal emails obtained through Freedom of Information requests showed a pattern of threats, intimidation, and abuse of power that painted a clear picture of corruption. The State Attorney General's office had launched a formal investigation, and Brooks was facing the very real possibility of criminal charges and disbarment. Maya had returned to school after a week of media attention, determined to finish her senior year and maintain some semblance of normalcy. But normal was no longer an option for someone who had become the face of a movement. Students she'd never spoken to before approached her in the hallways, some to thank her for her courage, others to share their own stories of abuse and intimidation. Teachers who had previously seemed distant began treating her with a new level of respect and support. The most significant change, however, was in the school's administration. Principal Anderson, perhaps motivated by guilt over his initial handling of the situation, had implemented a comprehensive anti-bullying program that included mandatory training for all staff and students. Anonymous reporting systems had been established, and a new zero-tolerance policy meant that students like Tyler could no longer hide behind their family connections when they violated other students' rights. Tyler himself had been expelled from Riverside High following the investigation into his behavior. The video evidence of his assault on Maya, combined with testimony from multiple witnesses and victims, had made his position untenable. His college scholarship offers had been revoked, and his father's legal troubles meant that even private school options were becoming limited. For someone who had spent his entire life believing he was untouchable, the fall from grace had been swift and complete. Maya found herself walking through the same hallway where everything had started, but now the space felt different. Instead of the tension and fear that had once permeated the atmosphere, there was a sense of possibility and hope. Students moved through the corridors with more confidence, knowing that their rights would be protected and their voices would be heard. Emma Chun had become one of Maya's closest friends, their bond forged in the crucible of standing up to power together. Emma had testified in the investigation against Tyler, providing crucial witness testimony that helped establish the pattern of his behavior. She'd also become something of a leader herself, organizing student support groups and advocacy initiatives that extended the impact of Maya's actions. Sam Rodriguez had used his technical skills to create a digital archive of evidence related to Tyler's behavior and his father's corruption. The database had become a valuable resource for investigators and journalists, and Sam had gained recognition for his work in digital activism. He'd even received early admission to Carnegie Mellon's computer science program, with professors citing his work on the Brooks case as evidence of his potential for using technology to promote social justice. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maya was making her way to her locker when she noticed a commotion near the main entrance. A group of students had gathered around someone Maya didn't recognize, a girl who looked to be about 15 and was clearly upset about something. Maya's protective instincts, honed by months of advocating for others, kicked in immediately. As Maya approached the group, she could hear fragments of conversation that made her blood boil. The new girl, whose name was apparently Jessica, was describing an incident that had happened at her previous school in a neighboring district. She'd been transferred to Riverside High after reporting a sexual assault by a popular athlete, only to face retaliation and harassment that made her education impossible to continue. "They said I was lying," Jessica was telling Emma, tears streaming down her face. "They said I was just trying to get attention, that I was jealous because he was dating someone else. The administration did nothing, and eventually my parents had to pull me out of school." Maya felt a familiar anger rising in her chest, the same righteous fury that had driven her to fight back against Tyler Brooks. Here was another girl, another victim of a system that protected perpetrators and silenced survivors. But this time, Maya was in a position to do something about it from the beginning. "Jessica," Maya said, stepping into the circle of students, "I'm Maya Thompson. I want you to know that what happened to you at your old school won't happen here. We've worked too hard to change things to let anyone fall through the cracks now." Jessica looked up at Maya with a mixture of recognition and hope. Like most teenagers in Pennsylvania, she'd seen the news coverage of Maya's case and knew the story of how one girl's courage had brought down a corrupt district attorney and his predatory son. "I don't want to cause any more trouble," Jessica sighed quietly. "I just want to finish high school and move on with my life." Maya sat down next to Jessica, her voice gentle but firm. "You didn't cause trouble at your old school, and you won't cause trouble here. The people who hurt you caused trouble, and the people who protected them caused trouble. All you did was tell the truth, and there's never anything wrong with that." Emma nodded in agreement, and soon other students were sharing their own experiences and offering support to Jessica. Maya watched this organic outpouring of solidarity and realized that the culture at Riverside High had fundamentally changed. Students were no longer isolated in their struggles, no longer afraid to speak up when they witnessed injustice. Later that day, Maya found herself in Principal Anderson's office, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. Instead of being called in for discipline or intimidation, she'd been invited to discuss the school's ongoing efforts to create a safer environment for all students. Jessica's case had highlighted the need for better support systems for transfer students who had experienced trauma at their previous schools. "Maya, I want to thank you again for what you've done for this school," Principal Anderson said, his tone reflecting genuine gratitude. "But I also want to ask for your continued help. Cases like Jessica's show us that our work isn't finished." Maya nodded, understanding that her role had evolved from victim to advocate to leader. "What do you need from me?" Principal Anderson outlined a plan for a peer counseling program that would pair experienced students like Maya with newcomers who had faced similar challenges. The program would provide emotional support, practical guidance, and advocacy when needed. Maya would be trained as a peer counselor and would help establish protocols for supporting survivors of assault and harassment. "I'm honored that you'd ask me to be part of this," Maya said, "but I want to make sure we're not just putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds. Real change means addressing the root causes of these problems, not just supporting victims after the fact." Principal Anderson leaned forward, clearly interested in Maya's perspective. "What do you mean?" Maya had spent months thinking about the systemic issues that had allowed Tyler Brooks to operate with impunity for so long. "We need to change the culture that creates predators in the first place. That means education about consent and respect, starting in elementary school. It means holding coaches and teachers accountable when they look the other way. It means making sure that popular students and athletes aren't treated like they're above the rules. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Maya and Principal Anderson developing a comprehensive approach to prevention and response that went far beyond anything the school had previously attempted. Maya realized that she was no longer just a student advocating for herself, but a young leader helping to shape policy and create lasting institutional change. As spring turned to summer and graduation approached, Maya reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning in September, when she'd first walked into Riverside High. She'd gained admission to Penn State with a full academic scholarship, just as she'd originally planned, but her acceptance letter had been accompanied by invitations to speak at conferences about student advocacy and to participate in leadership programs for social justice activists. The college admissions officers, who had reviewed Maya's application, had been impressed not just by her academic achievements, but by her demonstrated commitment to creating positive change in her community. Her essay about standing up to bullying and corruption had become a template that guidance counselors shared with other students applying to competitive universities. Maya's relationship with her grandmother had also deepened during this period. Rosa Thompson had watched her granddaughter's transformation with pride, seeing the principles and skills she'd taught Maya being applied to challenges far beyond physical self-defense. The mental discipline, emotional control, and strategic thinking that were essential to martial arts had served Maya well in navigating the complex world of media attention, legal proceedings, and institutional change. "You've learned the most important lesson," Rosa told Maya during one of their regular training sessions. "Real strength isn't about being able to fight. It's about knowing when to fight, how to fight, and what you're fighting for." Maya understood. Now that her physical confrontation with Tyler Brooks had been just the beginning of a much larger battle. The real fight was against systems of oppression and cultures of silence that allowed predators to operate freely. It was a fight that required not just courage and skill, but patience, strategy, and the ability to build coalitions with others who shared the same values. The legal proceedings against District Attorney Brooks had concluded with his resignation from office and a plea agreement that included community service and a permanent ban from practicing law. Tyler Brooks had been ordered to undergo counseling and to perform community service, specifically focused on understanding the impact of sexual assault on victims. While some observers felt the punishments were too lenient, Maya understood that the real victory was in the precedent that had been established. Powerful people were not above the law, and victims would be heard and believed. On graduation day, Maya walked across the stage at Riverside High to receive her diploma, but the moment felt less like an ending than a beginning. She'd already been invited to speak at freshman orientation sessions at Penn State about bystander intervention and campus safety. She'd been asked to serve on a statewide task force examining sexual assault prevention in schools. Most importantly, she'd helped create a model for how schools could respond to harassment and assault that was being studied and replicated across Pennsylvania. As Maya looked out at the audience of family, friends, and community members who had supported her journey, she saw Jessica sitting with her parents, smiling for what Maya knew was the first time in months. Jessica had thrived at Riverside High, supported by the peer counseling program and the culture of accountability that Maya had helped establish. She'd even started dating a boy in her class, something she hadn't thought would be possible after her traumatic experiences at her previous school. Emma Chun was sitting in the front row, having been selected as valedictorian, partly based on her advocacy work and leadership in student government. Sam Rodriguez was nearby, preparing for his summer internship with a cybersecurity firm that had recruited him specifically because of his work documenting digital evidence in harassment cases. Both of them had been transformed by their involvement in Maya's case, discovering leadership abilities and career directions they might never have found otherwise. Maya's parents sat with Jennifer, who had become not just Maya's attorney, but a close family friend and mentor. Jennifer's successful handling of the Brooks case had elevated her profile in civil rights law, leading to new opportunities and high-profile cases defending victims of sexual assault and institutional corruption. She'd also established a scholarship fund at her law school for students interested in pursuing civil rights work. After the graduation ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by underclassmen who wanted to thank her for the changes she'd brought to their school. Many of them shared stories about how the new culture of accountability had affected their own experiences, how they felt safer and more empowered to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing. "Maya," said a sophomore named Alex, whom Maya recognized, "from the peer counseling program, I wanted you to know that what you did changed my life. I was being harassed by some older students, and before, I would have just suffered in silence. But because of the systems you helped put in place, I was able to get help, and the harassment stopped." These were the moments that made all the stress, media attention, and legal battles worthwhile. Maya had discovered that her greatest strength wasn't her ability to physically defend herself, but her capacity to inspire others to find their own voices and stand up for what was right. As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Maya stood in the parking lot of Riverside High, looking up at the building that had been the center of so much drama and transformation. She thought about the scared, invisible girl who had walked through those doors 9 months earlier, and she marveled at how much had changed. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. When she opened it, she found a message from a girl named Sarah who attended a high school in Ohio. Sarah had seen Maya's story in the news and had been inspired to report her own assault by a member of her school's basketball team. The investigation was ongoing, but Sarah wanted Maya to know that her courage had given other girls the strength to speak up. Maya realized that her impact was extending far beyond Riverside High, far beyond Millbrook, Pennsylvania. She'd become part of a movement of young women who were refusing to accept the status quo, who were demanding accountability from institutions and individuals who had previously operated with impunity. As Maya got into her car to drive home, she thought about the future that lay ahead of her. College would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to learn and grow and make a difference. She'd already been contacted by student organizations at Penn State who wanted her to help establish campus safety programs and advocate for survivors of sexual assault. But Maya also knew that her most important work might be the quiet, daily task of living her life with integrity and courage, of being the kind of person others could turn to when they needed support or guidance. She'd learned that real change happened not just through dramatic confrontations, but through countless small acts of kindness, truth-telling, and solidarity. Maya pulled out of the Riverside High parking lot for the last time as a student, but she knew she'd be back. She'd already committed to speaking at assemblies for incoming freshmen, helping to orient new students to the culture of respect and accountability that she'd helped create. She'd also agreed to serve on the school board's new Student Safety Committee, ensuring that the voices of young people remained central to policy-making decisions. As she drove through the familiar streets of Millbrook, Maya reflected on the lessons she'd learned over the past year. She discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. She'd learned that justice wasn't something that happened automatically, but something that required constant vigilance and effort from people willing to fight for it. Most importantly, she'd realized that individual actions could have far-reaching consequences, that one person's refusal to accept injustice could inspire others to demand better. Maya Thompson had entered Riverside High as a quiet honor student, hoping to remain invisible until graduation. She was leaving as a young leader who had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who had been inspired by her example. The girl who had once trained in secret to defend herself had become a public advocate for justice, using her voice and her platform to ensure that no one else would have to face what she had faced alone. As Maya turned into her driveway, she saw her grandmother's car parked outside. Rosa Thompson was waiting on the front porch, still wearing the dress she'd put on for graduation, her face glowing with pride. Maya knew that her grandmother understood better than anyone how far she'd traveled from that morning when Tyler Brooks had made the mistake of targeting the wrong girl. "Ready for the next adventure?" Rosa asked as Maya walked up the front steps. Maya smiled, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility that came with the platform she'd built and the trust others had placed in her. "I'm ready," she sighed, and she meant it. The quiet student who had once hidden her abilities had become a force for change whose impact would be felt for years to come. Maya Thompson had discovered that sometimes the most powerful way to defend yourself is to ensure that others never have to face the same battles you've fought. In standing up for herself, she'd stood up for everyone, and in finding her own voice, she'd helped others find theirs. 5 years later, Maya Thompson stood at the podium of the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, addressing a packed auditorium filled with legislators, educators, advocates, and survivors. The occasion was the signing of the Student Safety and Accountability Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation that had grown directly from the changes Maya had catalyzed at Riverside High School. As she looked out at the audience, Maya could see familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd, people whose lives had been touched by the movement that had begun with one moment of courage in a high school hallway. Emma Chun sat in the front row, now a graduate student in social work at the University of Pennsylvania, specializing in trauma counseling for adolescents. She had spent the past 3 years working with survivors of sexual assault and had become a recognized expert in peer support models for young people. Emma's thesis research had focused on the long-term impacts of student-led advocacy movements, using Maya's case as a primary example of how individual courage could create systemic change. Sam Rodriguez was live-streaming the event from his position near the back of the auditorium, his software company having developed specialized apps for reporting harassment and documenting evidence in institutional settings. His technology had been adopted by school districts across 12 states, and he'd become a sought-after consultant on digital safety and evidence preservation. The shy computer geek who had helped document Tyler Brooks' downfall had evolved into a successful entrepreneur whose work was protecting countless young people from predators. Jessica Martinez, the transfer student Maya had mentored during her senior year, was now a sophomore at Temple University studying criminal justice. She had testified before the state legislature about the importance of support systems for students who had experienced trauma at previous schools. Jessica's journey from victim to advocate had inspired the creation of specialized programs for transfer students dealing with harassment-related school changes. Maya's grandmother Rosa sat with Maya's parents in a section reserved for family members, her pride evident in every line of her weathered face. At 75, Rosa had become something of a celebrity in the martial arts community, with her story of training her granddaughter to defend herself becoming legend. She had been invited to speak at self-defense conferences around the country, and her small dojo in Millbrook had become a pilgrimage site for parents wanting to prepare their children for an uncertain world. Jennifer Thompson Martinez, now a partner in one of Philadelphia's most prestigious civil rights firms, sat with the other legal professionals who had worked on cases inspired by Maya's precedent. Jennifer's successful prosecution of District Attorney Brooks had launched her into the top tier of civil rights attorneys, and she had won landmark cases involving institutional corruption and the silencing of sexual assault victims. She had also established the Thompson-Martinez Foundation, which provided legal representation for young people fighting institutional injustice. As Maya began her speech, her voice carried the confidence and authority that had developed over years of public speaking and advocacy work. She was no longer the scared teenager who had hidden her abilities and hoped to remain invisible. Maya had grown into a poised young woman whose presence commanded attention and whose words carried the weight of hard-won experience. 5 years ago, I was a high school senior who wanted nothing more than to graduate quietly and move on to college. Maya began, her voice clear and strong. I had no intention of becoming an advocate, no desire to challenge powerful institutions, and certainly no plan to spend my college years testifying before legislative committees and speaking at conferences about sexual assault prevention. Maya paused, allowing her words to resonate with the audience. Many of the people in the room had heard her story before, but she knew that repetition was necessary to drive home the lessons that needed to be learned and remembered. But sometimes, life doesn't give us the luxury of choice. Sometimes we're forced to decide between our personal comfort and our moral obligations. Sometimes we have to choose between staying silent and speaking truth to power, even when that power seems insurmountable. Maya's speech detailed not just her own journey, but the broader movement that had grown from her individual act of resistance. The Student Safety and Accountability Act that was being signed into law that day represented the culmination of years of advocacy, research, and legislative work by dozens of organizations and hundreds of individuals who had been inspired by Maya's example. The legislation mandated comprehensive anti-harassment training for all school personnel, established standardized reporting procedures for incidents of sexual assault and harassment, and created oversight mechanisms to ensure that cases were handled appropriately regardless of the social status or political connections of the accused. Most importantly, it included provisions for supporting survivors and ensuring that they weren't re-victimized by institutional responses that prioritized reputation management over justice. Maya's college years at Penn State had been transformative in ways she never could have anticipated. Her freshman year had been challenging, as she struggled to balance her academic work with the ongoing demands of advocacy and public speaking. The media attention that had followed her to college had initially been overwhelming, but Maya had learned to use her platform strategically, choosing opportunities that aligned with her values and could create meaningful change. Her major in criminology had provided Maya with the theoretical framework to understand the systemic issues she had encountered at Riverside High. She had studied the intersection of power, privilege, and justice, learning about the ways in which institutions often protected perpetrators while silencing victims. Her senior thesis had examined the effectiveness of student-led advocacy movements in creating lasting institutional change, and it had been published in the American Journal of Criminal Justice. But Maya's real education had come through her work with the campus Sexual Assault Prevention Office, where she had counseled survivors, trained peer advocates, and developed educational programs for incoming students. She had seen firsthand how the trauma of sexual assault could derail young people's lives, and she had also witnessed the incredible resilience and courage of survivors who refused to be defined by what had happened to them. Maya's graduate work at Georgetown Law School had focused on civil rights law and institutional reform, preparing her for a career in advocacy and policy development. She had interned with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, working on cases involving educational institutions that had failed to protect students from harassment and assault. Her work had contributed to significant settlements and policy changes at universities across the country. During law school, Maya had also maintained her connection to Riverside High School, returning regularly to speak with students and to monitor the ongoing implementation of the reforms she had helped establish. The school had become a model for other districts, with educators and administrators visiting from around the country to learn about their comprehensive approach to preventing and responding to harassment. Williams was known throughout the district as a no-nonsense administrator who preferred direct solutions to complex problems. "I apologize for the interruption," Dr. Williams said as she took in the crowded conference room, "but this situation has reached the point where district-level oversight is necessary. We've had inquiries from 3 news outlets, 2 law firms, and a state representative's office since these videos went viral." Maya felt the room spinning slightly as the full Scope of the attention her actions had generated became clear. What had started as a moment of self-defense was now involving lawyers and politicians, threatening to spiral into something far beyond her ability to control or understand. Dr. Williams continued, addressing the room as a whole, we need to reach a resolution that protects all students while acknowledging the realities of what occurred. Tyler, your behavior was completely unacceptable and will result in suspension and mandatory counseling. Maya, while your response was justified, the skill level you demonstrated raises questions about our policies regarding students with advanced martial arts training. Uncle Marcus stood up, his protective instincts fully engaged. Dr. Williams, Maya is being punished for defending herself because she did it too well. That's not justice, that's discrimination. Mr. Chun, I understand your concerns, Dr. Williams replied, but we have to consider the safety of all our students. When someone has the capability to seriously injure others, even in self-defense, we need appropriate safeguards in place. Maya finally found her voice, standing up to address the room directly. I've never hurt anyone at this school. I've never even fought back before today, even when Tyler and his friends made my life miserable for months. I only defended myself when he sexually assaulted me, and I did it without hurting him. I don't understand why I'm being treated like a threat when Tyler is the one who committed a crime. The stark clarity of Maya's statement cut through the administrative double-talk and political maneuvering, forcing everyone in the room to confront the fundamental injustice of treating a victim as equally culpable as her attacker. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Mrs. Morrison's face grew pale as the legal implications of her son's actions became clearer. Coach Martinez spoke into the silence that followed Maya's statement. If I may suggest something, I think we're approaching this backwards. Instead of treating Maya's skills as a problem to be managed, we should be recognizing them as an asset. She demonstrated exactly the kind of discipline and restraint we want to see from all our students. Dr. Williams considered this perspective, her administrative mind working through the various angles and potential outcomes. What are you suggesting, Coach Martinez? I'm suggesting that Maya's response to Tyler's assault should be held up as an example of how to handle conflict appropriately. She used the minimum force necessary to protect herself. She didn't escalate the situation, and she showed mercy to someone who didn't deserve it. Those are exactly the values we claim to teach in our character education programs. Uncle Marcus looked at Coach Martinez with newfound respect, recognizing an unexpected ally in the fight to protect Maya from becoming collateral damage in the school's attempt to manage public relations. Principal Thompson cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the immediate decisions that needed to be made. Regardless of the broader policy discussions, we need to address the specific disciplinary actions for this incident. Tyler will receive a 2-week suspension and will be required to complete sensitivity training before returning to classes. He will also be removed from the basketball team for the remainder of the season. Mrs. Morrison gasped at this announcement, clearly not having anticipated that her son's athletic career would be affected by his actions. You can't do that. Tyler has scholarship opportunities that depend on his basketball performance. You're ruining his future over a misunderstanding. Tyler looked at his mother with something approaching shame, finally beginning to understand the full cost of his behavior. Mom, it wasn't a misunderstanding. I assaulted Maya, and there should be consequences for that. Maybe losing basketball will help me remember not to hurt people. The admission silenced Mrs. Morrison completely, leaving her staring at her son as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The golden boy she had protected and enabled was acknowledging responsibility for his actions in a way that shattered her carefully constructed worldview. Dr. Williams turned her attention to Maya, her expression more sympathetic than it had been earlier. Maya, while your actions were justified, the attention this incident has generated means We need to discuss how to handle the media interest and ensure your safety and privacy going forward." Maya looked around the room at the adults who were trying to determine her future, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of decisions she had never anticipated having to make. "I just want to finish school and go to college. I don't want to be famous, and I don't want to be treated like a threat. I just want to be left alone." Uncle Marcus put his arm around Maya's shoulders, his protective instincts evident in every line of his body. "Whatever decisions are made here, Maya's well-being comes first." Principal Anderson, now nearing retirement, had become one of Maya's strongest allies and supporters. His initial reluctance to challenge powerful families had given way to a fierce commitment to protecting all students, and he had implemented policies that went far beyond what was required by law. Under his leadership, Riverside High had not had a single case of unreported sexual harassment in the 5 years since Maya's incident, and their model was being studied by education researchers nationwide. The transformation of Tyler Brooks had been one of the more surprising developments in the years following Maya's confrontation with him. The court-ordered counseling had apparently been effective, as Tyler had eventually acknowledged the harm he had caused and had begun working with organizations that focused on preventing sexual violence. He had completed community college and was now studying social work, with the goal of working with young men who exhibited predatory behavior. Tyler's father, Richard Brooks, had never recovered from the scandal that had ended his political career. After completing his community service and losing his law license, he had moved out of Pennsylvania and had largely disappeared from public view. The corruption charges and abuse of power that had brought him down had become a case study in law. Schools across the country, illustrating the importance of prosecutorial ethics and the dangers of using public office for personal benefit. Maya's speech at the Capitol building emphasized the broader lessons of her experience, connecting her individual story to the systemic changes that were needed to protect all young people from harassment and assault. "Real change doesn't happen because of one person's courage," Maya told the audience. "It happens because that courage inspires others to find their own voices, to demand better from their institutions, and to refuse to accept the unacceptable." The legislation we're celebrating today represents the collective effort of thousands of people who believe that young people deserve to learn in environments free from fear and intimidation. Maya went on to discuss the ongoing challenges facing efforts to prevent sexual harassment and assault in schools. Despite the progress that had been made, she noted that too many young people still faced situations similar to what she had experienced. The legislation being signed that day was an important step forward, but it was not the end of the work that needed to be done. "We cannot become complacent," Maya warned. "Every generation of students deserves the same protections and support systems that we are establishing today. That means ongoing vigilance, continued advocacy, and the recognition that the fight for justice is never truly finished." After the ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by young people who had traveled from across Pennsylvania to attend the event. Many of them were survivors of harassment or assault who had been inspired by Maya's example to speak up and seek justice. Others were student advocates who were working to implement similar reforms in their own schools and communities. One girl, who couldn't have been more than 16, approached Maya with tears in her eyes. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "Last year, something similar to what happened to you happened to me at my school. But because of the changes you helped create, I was believed, I was supported, and the person who hurt me faced real consequences. I don't know if I would have had the courage to report it if I hadn't known that other girls, like you, had fought back and won." These were the moments that reminded Maya why she had chosen a path that was often difficult and emotionally draining. Every young person who was protected by the system she had helped create represented a victory not just for that individual, but for the broader principle that power should not be allowed to operate without accountability. Maya's career trajectory had evolved naturally from her advocacy work. After graduating from law school, she had been recruited by a prestigious civil rights firm that specialized in educational equity cases. Her first major case had involved a high school in Texas where administrators had systematically covered up sexual assaults by members of the football team. Maya's work on that case had resulted in a landmark settlement that included comprehensive reforms and compensation for dozens of victims. From there, Maya had taken on increasingly complex and high-profile cases, always focusing on situations where institutional power was being used to silence victims and protect perpetrators. She had developed a reputation as a fierce advocate who combined legal expertise with deep understanding of the psychological and social dynamics that allowed harassment and assault to flourish in educational settings. Maya's personal life had also evolved during these years of professional growth. She had met David Chen, Emma's older brother, during her second year of law school, and they had married the previous year in a ceremony attended by many of the people who had been part of Maya's journey from victim to advocate. David was a pediatric physician who shared Maya's commitment to protecting vulnerable young people, and their relationship had been built on mutual respect and shared values. Maya and David had recently purchased a house in a suburb of Philadelphia, close enough to Maya's work but far enough from the intensity of her advocacy to provide a peaceful retreat. They were planning to start a family in the next few years, and Maya looked forward to the opportunity to raise children who would grow up in a world where the system she had helped create would protect them from the kinds of predators she had faced. But Maya's most important relationship remained with her grandmother Rosa, who had been the foundation of everything Maya had accomplished. Rosa's teachings about strength, discipline, and moral courage had shaped not just Maya's ability to defend herself physically, but her understanding of what it meant to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. Rosa had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia the previous year, and Maya had been spending more time in Millbrook, helping her parents care for the woman who had been such a formative influence in her life. Despite her cognitive decline, Rosa still remembered the essential lessons she had taught Maya, and she continued to offer wisdom and support during their regular visits. "You did what I always hoped you would do," Rosa had told Maya during a recent visit. "You learned that real strength isn't about being able to hurt people. It's about being able to protect them." As Maya prepared to leave the Capitol building that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared teenager who had walked into Riverside High School, hoping to remain invisible, had become a nationally recognized advocate whose work was protecting thousands of young people across the country. Maya understood that her story had become larger than her individual experience, that it had evolved into a symbol of the possibility for change, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable power. She had become proof that one person's refusal to accept injustice could create ripple effects that extended far beyond anything they might have imagined. But Maya also knew that her work was far from finished. The legislation being signed that day was an important milestone, but it was just one step in a much longer journey toward creating educational environments where all young people could learn and grow without fear of harassment or assault. As Maya walked out of the Capitol building and into the warm evening air, she thought about all the young people who were facing situations similar to what she had experienced 5 years earlier. She hoped that the systems and protections that had been put in place would give them the support and advocacy they needed to seek justice and healing. Maya also thought about the next generation of advocates who would carry this work forward, young people who would build on the foundation she and others had created to address challenges that hadn't even been imagined yet. The digital age was creating new forms of harassment and assault, and the advocates of the future would need to develop new strategies and solutions to protect vulnerable young people. As Maya got into her car for the drive back to Philadelphia, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. The quiet girl who had once hidden her abilities and hoped to avoid attention had become a powerful voice for justice, whose influence extended far beyond anything she could have predicted. Maya Thompson had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we never planned to fight, and that the greatest victories come not from personal achievement, but from using our strengths and experiences to protect others who face similar challenges. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear when something important was at stake. The girl who had once trained in secret to defend herself had become a public champion for justice, proving that individual actions could indeed change the world when they were grounded in principle and sustained by determination. Maya's story had become proof that even the quietest voices could become powerful when they chose to speak up for what was right. 10 years had passed since that fateful morning at Riverside High School, and Maya Thompson stood in her spacious office overlooking downtown Philadelphia, surrounded by awards, commendations, and photographs documenting a decade of advocacy work that had fundamentally changed how educational institutions across America handled sexual harassment and assault cases. The walls told the story of a movement that had begun with one teenager's refusal to be victimized and had grown into a nationwide transformation of policies, procedures, and cultural attitudes. Maya's law firm, Thompson Chun and Associates, had become the premier destination for survivors seeking justice against institutional negligence and cover-ups. The firm's success rate was extraordinary, not just in terms of legal victories, but in the systemic changes their cases had produced. Every settlement included comprehensive reform requirements, ensuring that their clients' suffering would prevent future victims from experiencing similar trauma. The morning's schedule included a video conference with education officials in California who were implementing the Millbrook model of harassment prevention in their school districts. The model, named after Maya's hometown, had become the gold standard for creating safe educational environments, combining proactive prevention, responsive intervention, and comprehensive support for survivors. Over 300 school districts across the United States had adopted some version of the model, and research showed dramatic reductions in harassment incidents wherever it was properly implemented. Maya's assistant knocked and entered with the day's correspondence, including a thick envelope from the Department of Education. Maya opened it to find notification that she had been selected as one of 3 finalists for the National Education Advocacy Award, recognizing individuals who had made extraordinary contributions to student safety and rights. The letter noted that her work had been instrumental in shaping federal policy and had served as a catalyst for legislative changes in 47 states. As Maya read the letter, her mind drifted back to the scared 17-year-old who had simply wanted to finish high school without causing any trouble. That girl could never have imagined that her moment of resistance would eventually influence national policy, or that her name would become synonymous with student advocacy. The transformation had been gradual, built through countless small victories and persistent efforts to turn personal trauma into systemic change. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her husband David, who was at their daughter's school for a parent-teacher conference. 8-year-old Sophia Thompson Chin was thriving in an educational environment that bore little resemblance to the one her mother had navigated. Sophia's school had comprehensive anti-bullying programs, trained counselors who specialized in trauma-informed care, and a culture that prioritized emotional safety alongside academic achievement. David's text included a photo of Sophia receiving an award for her participation in the school's peer mediation program, where older students were trained to help resolve conflicts between younger classmates. Even at 8, Sophia was showing signs of the same protective instincts that had driven her mother's advocacy work, though Maya hoped her daughter would never face the challenges that had shaped her own path. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that her daughter was growing up in a world that Maya's own actions had helped create. Sophia attended school in an environment where harassment was taken seriously from the earliest grades, where bystander intervention was taught as a core life skill, and where reporting concerning behavior was seen as an act of courage rather than tattling. The systems that protected Sophia and her classmates were the direct result of changes that had begun with Maya's refusal to accept Tyler Brooks' assault. Maya's thoughts were interrupted by her secretary announcing the arrival of Dr. Patricia Williams, a researcher from Harvard's Graduate School of Education who was conducting a longitudinal study of the impact of student-led advocacy movements on educational policy. Dr. Williams had been following Maya's story for several years, documenting how individual cases of resistance could create widespread institutional change. Dr. Williams entered Maya's office carrying a thick folder of research materials and wearing the excited expression of someone who had discovered something significant in her data. As they settled into the comfortable chairs near Maya's office windows, Dr. Williams opened her folder and pulled out a series of charts and graphs that illustrated the reach and impact of the movement Maya had inadvertently started. "Maya, I wanted to share some preliminary findings from our research that I think will interest you," Dr. Williams began, spreading papers across the coffee table between them. "We've been tracking harassment incidents in schools across the country for the past decade, and the data shows a remarkable pattern that correlates directly with the implementation of policies inspired by your case." The charts showed dramatic decreases in reported harassment incidents in schools that had adopted comprehensive prevention programs based on the Millbrook model. More importantly, the data indicated that these schools also saw increases in reporting rates, suggesting that students felt safer coming forward when incidents did occur. The combination of fewer incidents and more responsive handling of reports had created educational environments that were significantly safer for all students. Dr. Williams pulled out another set of data, showing the long-term outcomes for students who had attended schools with strong harassment prevention programs compared to those who had not. Students from schools with comprehensive programs showed higher graduation rates, better mental health outcomes, and greater likelihood of pursuing higher education. The research demonstrated that creating safe learning environments had benefits that extended far beyond preventing harassment incidents. "What's most remarkable," Dr. Williams continued, "is how your individual case created a template that could be scaled and replicated across vastly different educational contexts. Urban schools, rural districts, private institutions, public universities. They've all been able to adapt the core principles you helped establish to their specific circumstances." Maya listened to the research findings with a mixture of pride and humility. She had never set out to become a national figure or to influence policy at the federal level. Her original goal had been much simpler: to defend herself and to ensure that Tyler Brooks faced consequences for his actions. But Dr. Williams' research confirmed what Maya had observed anecdotally over the years, that individual acts of courage could indeed create lasting systemic change when they were supported by effective advocacy and strategic thinking. Conversation turned to Maya's current work, which had evolved beyond individual legal cases to include policy development, training programs for educators and administrators, and research initiatives focused on emerging challenges. Maya had become a sought-after consultant for institutions that wanted to proactively address harassment and create cultures of respect and accountability. One of Maya's most significant recent projects involved working with technology companies to address online harassment and cyberbullying. The digital age had created new venues for predatory behavior, and Maya's expertise in understanding the psychology of harassment had proven valuable in developing platform policies and intervention strategies. Her work had contributed to changes in how social media companies handled reports of harassment and had influenced legislation regulating online behavior. Maya's office phone rang, and her assistant announced that Emma Chun was on the line. "Emma." Now Dr. Emma Chun, had completed her doctorate in social work and was directing a research institute focused on trauma-informed educational practices. Despite their different career paths, Maya and Emma had remained close friends and frequent collaborators. Their bond forged in those crucial days at Riverside High School when they had stood up to institutional power together. "Maya, I have incredible news," Emma said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The National Science Foundation just approved our grant proposal for a 5-year study of prevention programs in middle schools. We're going to be able to document the long-term impacts of early intervention on adolescent development and educational outcomes." The research Emma was describing would fill a crucial gap in understanding how harassment prevention programs affected younger students. Most existing research focused on high school and college populations, but there was growing recognition that effective prevention needed to start much earlier in students' educational careers. "That's fantastic, Emma," Maya replied, genuinely thrilled by her friend's success. "Have you thought about including some of the schools in the original Millbrook pilot program? It would be interesting to see how students who experienced the early implementations of our model are doing now that they're in middle school." Emma agreed that longitudinal tracking of students from the pilot programs would provide valuable data about the lasting effects of comprehensive harassment prevention. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Maya and Emma brainstorming research questions and methodological approaches that could advance the field's understanding of effective prevention strategies. After hanging up with Emma, Maya returned to her conversation with Dr. Williams, who had been listening with interest to the discussion of new research initiatives. Dr. Williams noted that Maya's continued involvement in research and policy development was unusual among attorneys, most of whom focused exclusively on individual cases rather than broader systemic issues. "What drives you to stay involved in the research and policy side of this work?" Dr. Williams asked. "You could certainly focus solely on your legal practice and be very successful." Maya considered the question carefully before responding. "I learned early on that winning individual cases, while important for my clients, wasn't enough to create the kind of change that would prevent other young people from experiencing what I went through. Real change requires understanding why these problems exist in the first place, and developing comprehensive solutions that address root causes rather than just symptoms." Maya went on to explain how her legal work and her policy advocacy reinforced each other. The cases she handled in court provided real-world examples of institutional failures that could inform policy development, while her involvement in research and policy work helped her understand the broader context of the individual cases she represented. Dr. Williams nodded thoughtfully, making notes about Maya's integrated approach to advocacy. "Your model of combining direct service, policy work, and research seems to be particularly effective at creating sustainable change. Have you considered formalizing this approach through an academic appointment or think tank affiliation?" Maya had indeed received offers from several universities and policy institutes over the years, but she had chosen to maintain her independence through her law firm. This structure allowed her to take on cases that might not be financially viable for larger firms, while also pursuing research and policy work that interested her. The conversation was interrupted by Maya's assistant, who announced that a group of high school students from Delaware had arrived for their scheduled visit. Maya had begun hosting regular visits from student groups who wanted to learn about advocacy and social change. These sessions had become some of her favorite professional activities, as they reminded her of her own journey from scared teenager to confident advocate. The Delaware students filed into Maya's conference room, their expressions mixing nervousness and excitement. Their teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, explained that the students were working on a project about social movements and had chosen to study Maya's case as an example of how individual actions could create widespread change. Maya began the session by asking the students to share what they already knew about her story, and what questions they hoped to have answered. Their responses revealed both sophisticated understanding of the legal and policy issues involved and genuine curiosity about the personal aspects of Maya's journey. One student, a junior named Marcus, raised his hand and asked, "Ms. Thompson-Chun, how did you know that fighting back was the right thing to do? Weren't you worried that it would make things worse?" Maya appreciated the thoughtfulness of the question, as it got to the heart of the decision-making process that had shaped her entire life. "Marcus, I didn't know that fighting back was the right thing to do in the sense of being certain about the outcomes. What I knew was that allowing Tyler Brooks to assault me without resistance was definitely the wrong thing to do. Sometimes we have to choose between uncertain consequences and certain injustice." Another student, a senior named Aisha, asked about the personal costs of Maya's advocacy work. "Do you ever regret becoming so public about what happened to you? Has it been worth giving up your privacy?" Maya considered Aisha's question carefully, recognizing it as one that many survivors struggled with when deciding whether to speak publicly about their experiences. "Aisha, there have definitely been times when I felt overwhelmed by the attention and responsibility that came with my story becoming public. But when I think about all the young people who have been protected by the changes we've created, I know that whatever personal costs I've paid have been worth it." The session continued for over an hour, with students asking thoughtful questions about legal strategy, policy development, and the personal journey of becoming an advocate. Maya was impressed by their insight and their genuine interest in creating positive change in their own communities. As the Delaware students prepared to leave, Ms. Rodriguez approached Maya privately. "I wanted to thank you for taking the time to meet with my students. Several of them have dealt with harassment issues themselves, and hearing your story directly from you has been incredibly empowering for them." Maya was touched by Ms. Rodriguez's words, as they reminded her of the ripple effects that continued to spread from her original act of resistance. Every young person who was inspired to speak up, to seek help, or to support others facing similar challenges represented a continuation of the movement that had begun in a high school hallway in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. After the students left, Maya returned to her office to prepare for her next appointment, a conference call with officials from the Department of Education who were developing new federal guidelines for handling harassment complaints in schools. Maya's expertise had made her a regular consultant on federal policy initiatives, and her input was sought whenever new regulations or guidelines were being developed. The conference call involved representatives from multiple agencies and advocacy organizations, all working to create comprehensive standards that would ensure consistent protection for students across the country. Maya's role in these discussions was to provide perspective on how policies would be implemented at the school level and to advocate for approaches that centered the needs and experiences of survivors. As Maya participated in the call, she reflected on how far the movement had come since her days at Riverside High School. What had begun as one teenager's refusal to be victimized had evolved into a nationwide network of advocates, researchers, policymakers, and educators all working toward the same goal of creating safe learning environments for all students. The call concluded with agreement on several key provisions that would strengthen protections for students and improve institutional responses to harassment complaints. Maya knew that these policy changes would take time to implement fully, but she also knew that each step forward represented progress toward a world where no student would have to face what she had faced alone. As the day wound down, Maya stood at her office window, looking out at the city lights of Philadelphia. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, and new opportunities to create positive change. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate how far she had traveled from that scared teenager who had hoped to remain invisible. Maya Thompson had become exactly what the world needed, a fierce advocate for justice who understood that real change required not just individual courage, but sustained commitment to building systems and institutions that protected the vulnerable and held the powerful accountable. Her legacy would be measured not just in the cases she had won or the policies she had influenced, but in the countless young people who would grow up in a safer, more just world because of the courage she had shown on one crucial morning in a high school hallway. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.